I never expected my uncle to leave me anything. In fact, I hadn't seen him in over 15 years. Growing up, he was the quiet, brooding figure at family gatherings, always sitting in the corner, sipping something dark from a glass, watching people more than talking to them. My father died when I was 12, and my mother disappeared a few years later. The police told me she probably left us, ran away, maybe couldn't handle the pressure of being a single mom. But something about that explanation never felt right. So when I got the call from a lawyer telling me that my uncle's estate was now in my name, I felt uneasy. The house was an old Victorian on the outskirts of town, the kind of place kids dared each other to walk past at night. It had tall, narrow windows, peeling paint, and an overgrown garden that seemed to claw at the walls. The will said everything inside was mine, including any personal effects. When I arrived, the air inside was heavy, stale. The first floor was cluttered but ordinary. Bookshelves filled with dust-covered encyclopedias, a kitchen frozen in the 1980s, the faint smell of mothballs, and something metallic. But what drew my attention immediately was the door at the end of the hallway. It had a new, shiny padlock on it, the only thing in the house that looked recent. The keys the lawyer gave me didn't include one for that lock. That night, I slept in the guest room, but I couldn't stop thinking about that door. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound, faint, irregular tapping. At first, I thought it was the pipes, but it was coming from the locked room. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. Silence. The next morning, I went into town and bought a set of lock-picking tools. It wasn't hard. I'd picked up a few tricks in college from friends who thought it was funny to sneak into each other's dorm rooms. The lock gave way after just a minute. The room inside was small and windowless, lit only by a single dangling bulb. The walls were lined with metal shelves stacked with boxes, binders, and plastic containers. Dust coated everything, except for one shelf where the dust had been recently disturbed. I opened the nearest box and froze. It was full of photographs, all of my mother. Some from family events I remembered, others in places I had never seen. In several, she looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder. At the bottom of the box was a manila folder labeled, Case 1997, Private. Inside were newspaper clippings about her disappearance, printed police reports, and, horrifyingly, a coroner's report that I had never seen before. But there was no body. The report simply stated, presumed deceased. As I dug deeper, I found something stranger. A stack of cassette tapes, each labeled with a date. The earliest was from 2 weeks before my mother disappeared. The last was from the day she vanished. I didn't have a cassette player, but I found one in another box, along with a fresh pack of batteries. The first tape was mostly muffled conversation, but I recognized her voice. She sounded tense, angry. The second tape, the one from the day she disappeared, made my blood run cold. It started with her shouting. My uncle's voice, calm but firm, told her to stop making this harder. Then there was a loud crash, a thud, and silence. After a few seconds, my uncle's voice again, quieter now. It's done. I sat there for a long time, the player still in my hands, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. My mother hadn't just left. She'd been here, in this house. And my uncle had been the last person to see her alive. I decided to search the rest of the locked room. Behind one of the shelves, there was a small door, almost hidden in the wall paneling. It led to a narrow staircase going down. The air grew colder with each step. At the bottom was a basement I didn't know existed. In the center of the floor was an old trunk, locked with a heavy latch. When I pried it open, the smell hit me first, something rotten, old, like wet earth and decay. Inside were more personal items. A necklace I remembered my mother wearing, a pair of shoes, a scarf. All neatly arranged, as if someone had been keeping them as trophies. I staggered back, while rising in my throat, and that's when I noticed the newest item in the trunk. It wasn't dusty like the rest, it was a modern smartphone. My uncle had died 2 weeks ago, so why was his phone here, in a sealed trunk? I turned it on. There was only one video saved. It was dated 2 years after my mother's disappearance. The video opened to darkness. For a moment, I thought it was just a black screen, but then a light flickered on. A single overhead bulb swinging slightly, casting long shadows across a small concrete room. The camera seemed to be set on the floor, aimed upward. And then, I saw her. My mother. She was older, thinner, her hair streaked with gray, but it was her, sitting on a metal chair, hands bound in front of her. Her eyes were swollen, like she'd been crying for days. She looked directly into the camera, and my breath caught. "Please, someone, if you find this." Before she could finish, my uncle's voice cut in from behind the camera. "You know no one's coming, Linda. You brought this on yourself." I felt my hand shaking as I clutched the phone. My mother's expression hardened. She said something I couldn't quite hear, and my uncle stepped into frame. He looked older than I remembered, gaunt, almost skeletal, but his eyes were the same cold, sharp blue. He crouched down to her level. "You kept poking your nose where it didn't belong. You thought you could just walk away?" Then the camera jolted violently. The image blurred as it fell sideways, but the audio kept going. There was a sharp crack, like a gunshot, and then silence. The video ended. I sat there in the cold basement, staring at the phone in my hands, the sound of my own breathing filling the room. My mother had been alive, for years, after she was declared dead. And my uncle had kept her here. I didn't know whether to call the police right then or keep digging. Part of me was terrified that if I reported it too soon, everything would be taken away as evidence, and I'd never know the full truth. So I made a decision, reckless, maybe even dangerous, to search every inch of this house first. I went back upstairs and started with his study. The drawers were full of neatly labeled folders, tax records, property deeds, bank statements. But in the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a false panel, I found a thick, leather-bound notebook. Inside were page after page of cramped handwriting. The entries dated back decades. The earliest ones were mundane, notes about repairs on the house, the weather, errands. But around the mid-90s, the tone shifted. He wrote about surveillance, about keeping an eye on her movements. He mentioned my father's death, and implied it wasn't an accident. The words were careful, coded, but the message was clear. My uncle had been watching my mother for years, even before my father was gone. Then, there was an entry from the week she disappeared. "Finally done. No more lies. She's where she belongs, where I can keep her safe from herself. No one will ever find her." My stomach turned. He wasn't just holding her prisoner. In his twisted mind, he thought he was protecting her. The last entry, written just a month before his death, was even stranger. "She's gone now. I kept her as long as I could. It's not my fault. They came for her. They." The word echoed in my mind. Who were they? I kept reading, hoping for answers, but that was the final page. Back in the basement, I searched the corners, tapping on the walls for hollow spots. That's when I found it, a narrow gap behind an old shelving unit. I pulled it aside, revealing another door. This one wasn't locked. The room beyond was small, barely big enough to stand in. On the floor was a thin mattress, a blanket, and a pillow. The air was stale but fresher than I expected, like it hadn't been sealed for long. On the wall above the mattress was something that made my blood run cold. Dozens of photos, taped in a haphazard grid. They were all of me. Some were clearly taken years ago, at school, walking home, even through my apartment window. Others were recent. Very recent. In one, I was unlocking the front door of my place just a month ago. In another, I was asleep in my bed, the photo taken from only a few feet away. That's when I realized my uncle hadn't just been obsessed with my mother. He'd been watching me, too. The creak of the floorboards above snapped me out of my daze. My heart nearly stopped. The house was supposed to be empty. I killed the light and pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear. Slow, deliberate footsteps moved across the floor. Then a voice, low, male, unfamiliar. "Check the basement." I didn't wait to see who it was. I slipped out through the narrow room, back into the main basement, and grabbed the phone. The trunk was still open. I stuffed the tapes, the phone, and the notebook into my backpack. The footsteps were on the stairs now. I sprinted to the far corner where an old coal chute led outside. It was barely big enough for me to crawl through, but I didn't care. I wriggled out into the cold night air just as a flashlight beam swept across the basement behind me. I didn't go back. I didn't even stop running until I was 3 blocks away, gasping for breath. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a motel under a fake name and called a friend I trusted. The next morning, we went straight to the police. The investigation is still ongoing. The tapes, the phone, and the notebook are now in police custody. They confirmed that my mother's disappearance is officially being reopened as a homicide investigation. As for the men in the house that night, they haven't been identified. I don't know if they were people my uncle knew, or if he was part of something bigger, darker. What I do know is this: my uncle spent decades building a prison in that house. And for years, my mother was trapped inside it. Now, every time I close my eyes, I see that final video. I hear the gunshot. And I can't shake the feeling that someone is still watching me. Because yesterday, when I checked my mailbox, there was a single envelope inside. No return address. Inside was a photograph of me, taken from across the street. It was dated 3 days ago.